Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 63, Revenge of the Clones. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the 2005 film, The Island. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing very good, thanks. How are you?
I'm great. We've got a new dog. He's a lot of fun. I'm very happy with him.
Excellent.
What's new in your writing world?
New in my writing world, it's the same. I mean, slowly editing Zara 2. Yeah, nothing too exciting there. Just taking way longer than I expected. I was also invited to join Amazon's virtual voice beta for doing audio, like AI narrated audio for your book, which I was interested in because I don't have the money yet to pay, thousands of dollars to have a voice actor do it. And I don't know that I would be qualified to read it myself and record it. Plus, that takes hundreds of hours probably for me to do that, to do it well. So I was interested in this, but I'm not sure if I'll do it. I tried listening to some of the output, and one thing I noticed, for maybe because of the way I write, I don't use a lot of dialogue tags, for example. So listening to the virtual narration, it sounds okay, but it's hard to distinguish one character voice from the next sometimes.
Yeah.
So that was an issue. And then also, of course, it's terrible at sarcasm, which apparently I use more than I would have thought in my writing, because I'm like, that line doesn't work at all when someone just says it flat. I don't know if I'm going to use it or not. I might tweak with it. I mean, the thing is, if it was just push a button and go and let it run, maybe I would, but you still have to tweak it a bit, change pronunciation for names and certain words that it doesn't accentuate properly, things like that. So it's not like it's free of time.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm still undecided whether I'll use it or not. They are going to be adding the ability sometime this year to allow for multiple voices, so you can switch between narrators for different chapters, which would be good for my book because I have the Zara is from 2 points of view.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not in a rush to do it. I don't have people clamoring for an audiobook right now. But anyway, it's something there. It was interesting. And I think it's only going to get better. I think it's pretty good right now, but I'll think about it. Obviously you've used it, but when you're doing it, you set it up for free on YouTube, right? That's the only place you've used it?
Right. So my foray into audio booking has included one book that I used Google's audio. I think it's the Google Play Books audio feature.
Right. Yeah.
Which was a very high quality audio feature. I really liked that. It enabled me to change emphasis and really get sort of the quality reading of that particular story. That story is called The Forest of Time, and it is a prequel novella, so it's not a full novel. It's about 20,000 words. And it is the prequel novella to the time travel series. And you can hear that on YouTube. You can also get that on Google Play. They're free in both places. But it was a very high quality experience, and I really liked it.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the problem is, or the reason I chose not to do the rest of the series with that, is that the audio recording is not mine to do with as I please. If I wanted to take it off of Google Play, I couldn't use it anyplace else. And I didn't want to be anchored to a particular retailer with the audio version of the books. So that's why I went with an independent digital narration program that I could then have the audio version that I could do with what I want. But the flip side of that is it doesn't have the same functionality that the product that Google Play has. And I suspect that Amazon, with their new audio program that they invited you to join, is going to try to be a rival to whatever Google Play is using. And so I expect, just like you said, I agree with you, that they're going to improve the quality and the functionality of that program significantly in order to be competitive.
Yeah, they definitely will. It's in beta right now, so there are only 8 voices. I would expect that number to grow. I mean, I've seen technology out there already, not from any of these AI audio for books companies, but where you can say something yourself and have it map your speech and intonation and everything onto somebody else's voice. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up with something like that, where it sounds more natural, but maybe not in your voice. You know, maybe you don't like your voice, or maybe it's not appropriate for the story. You know, like for Zara, it probably should be narrated by a female because that's the primary POV for the book. But if I could record it and then have that map onto a female's voice, that would be interesting. When you map it over to the other voice, from what I've heard, at least as it was presented, I mean, it could all have been faked, but I don't think so. It sounded just like someone, like, let's say you license Angelina Jolie's voice or something. I would say something, and then it would sound like Angelina Jolie's voice, like almost flawlessly. It's amazing what they could do. It maps over so well.
That's cool. And it would help with things like pronunciation, especially if you are creating a world in your story that has its own tools, devices, you know, like you might see in science fiction. I make up names all the time for various things that are, so that and that was one of the things I really struggled with the digital narration program, was the pronunciation. Also, as you have discovered with the Amazon beta version, you know, just inflection and where emphasis is supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, it would be as you intended it. I'm assuming you're the one reading it. So that could be pretty cool. You know, people could license their voices to be used by other people.
Yeah.
And it would map over. So something like that. Of course, that's still a lot of work. You still have to go through, read your whole story, deal with your voice getting tired and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Making mistakes, everything there. The benefit, of course, of using a virtual voice is you don't do that. It just spits it out. So if that technology gets better, or maybe some kind of blend of the two, I think we'll reach a point where the barrier will be lower, you know, for the reader and for the author.
And I think that there will probably develop a kind of varying levels of what a reader wants to enjoy. You know, for example, a reader may choose to read just the ebook, or they may want to have the paperback, but they may also then choose for certain stories that they love so much to get a hard copy, a hardback, right? And so that they raise the level of their investment into the story. And we might see the same kind of level in audiobooks, where you can start with the digital narration that doesn't have the inflection of a human being, or you might decide you want a little the higher quality of the voice mapping version, or you may decide that you want the equivalent of the hardback copy with the dust jacket and listen to a pure human narrated story. We may start to see those kinds of levels.
Yeah, and then of course the next level of above that even is a fully produced story with sound effects and music and things like that. If you want to go really crazy.
Yes.
But the other nice thing about
Like
virtual.
the foil version of the hard copy of the hardback.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of the other nice things about the virtual voice is maybe you're listening to a book and you don't like the narrator, right? Well, if it's a virtual voice, you're like, oh, I want to listen to this in, read by a British female or an Australian male, right, with a really deep voice. Like you can change it on the listener side, which is really
Yeah.
nice. It doesn't have to just be one voice.
I didn't realize that could be done. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it can be done now, but there's no reason it couldn't be.
That would be really cool. Yeah. And really just tailor the listening experience for the reader. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, or television?
Books, movies, or television? I have, let's see, I started reading Project Hail Mary, which we'll talk about soon, I think a couple of weeks from now. And then I've been watching, what have I been watching? I started watching Fallout.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's an Amazon show based on the video game series, which I have never played. It's a game that seems like I would have wanted to have played. For some reason, I just never picked it up at the time. And then, after 3 or 4 of the games that come out, I've kind of missed that train. Although I've heard the latest ones are really good as well. So anyway, I'm enjoying it. I've only watched like 2 or 3 episodes maybe so far, but it seems like it's well done and fun, and surprisingly, people who've played the game seem to be enjoying it too, from what I've read.
Okay.
And what about you? What have you been reading or watching or whatever?
I have to say, after we talked about our favorite Marvel movies last week, I decided to get back and watch some Marvel movies. So I went back and watched Infinity War and Endgame and really enjoyed it. I haven't seen them for a while, so it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think it was during the pandemic I started watching the Marvel movies from the beginning, starting with Iron Man and the Hulk, and going through. We're going to go all the way through the Endgame, me and a couple friends. We didn't make it all the way through. I forget how far we got. We were pretty close. And then, I don't know, we just got busy doing things. So I was thinking I'd want to go back as well, because I really wanted to go up through Endgame again, too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll probably do that sometime soon.
I always have this vision of doing some kind of like a movie marathon, right? A rainy day movie marathon where you just start at the beginning and you just watch all these movies all the way through. And I can never get through more than like 1 or 2 before I'm bored and want to do something else.
Yeah. It's a lot if you're just sitting there watching all the time.
The other thing we've been watching, of course, is we're continuing to move through Foundation. We're really taking that slowly because we're enjoying it so much we don't want to rush it. So we're just watching 1 episode at a time and just really savoring it because it has been so good so far.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Look forward to discussing that one too.
Yeah, me too. So are you ready to talk about The Island?
I am.
All right, let's begin. Today we're talking about the story told in the 2005 film The Island, and I am going to read the synopsis that comes up when you type The Island into Google. Futuristic thriller about a contained, seemingly utopian facility in the mid-21st century. The residents hope to be chosen to go to the island, the last uncontaminated place on Earth. But when one inhabitant discovers that there are sinister forces at work, he and a female friend make a daring escape. Did you like this film?
Yeah, I like this movie. In watching it again, it made me think like if this had been done like 10 or 15 years earlier than it was, it probably would have been an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. Kind of has that, sci-fi setup and then, becomes an action story kind of thing. Seems like he would have been a good fit for this role as well. I really like the sci-fi aspect of the story, honestly. It still feels relevant today, perhaps even more so, as we get closer to this level of technology and we see this huge gap between the haves and have-nots, and the wealthiest of society having so much money and so much power, and in many ways seem to be above the rules and above the law. This seems like something that could easily happen, if not, in this country, in some country. So it's kind of scary.
Yeah.
And believable. And I feel like it hasn't really dated because of that. It still seems like it makes sense. I like the way they reveal the mystery of what's really going on. They kind of like dribbled out over the first part of the story. You know something's wrong, obviously, from the very beginning, but you don't quite know exactly what it is. And then you learn, okay, I see what's going on. Oh, okay, I get what's happening. And a little more and more and more. And then once it gets going, then it becomes a wonderfully over-the-top Michael Bay ridiculous action movie. But it still has a lot of fun in there. And I like the moral of the story. I like the payoff. I like that we get to see Sean Bean die again. I guess that's just what he does in movies.
Or Sean Bean.
Yeah, it's like, all right, you're gonna play this character. He's gonna die at the end. Well, obviously. Yeah, I like that they pay off a lot of things that they set up earlier in the story. I think generally it's a well-written story. I have some critical thoughts, which we'll get to, and where we can improve it. But overall, I liked it. I think it's a good setup, and I like how I like where they took it, and I like how they paid it off. What about you? Did you like this?
Yeah, not so much. But I agree with you that it's a great concept, and it does have a very relevant sort of message about power and about wealth and how it's used and how it can be abused, and the sort of crimes against humanity that can come through irresponsible use of wealth, I think is a good way to put it, maybe. Because the story is about these people who have all this money, who pay to have what is essentially supposed to be just cells available to them for their health and or longevity. But because they don't actually know what's going on within the business that is doing this, it's not being used responsibly. Their money is not being used responsibly, and there are human beings who are abused, who are murdered. And so I think that part of it was, like you said, very well taken. A good, that's what good science fiction does, and good, especially dystopian science fiction. It talks about how things can go bad if you're not moral and ethical and responsible with how you're making technological changes and technological leaps. So I agree with you. It had a lot of Gattaca vibes with the whole, are you healthy? There's too much sodium in your urine. I mean, there was some of that. And also had the Logan's Run vibes, so escaping from the place that's going to kill you off. So I enjoyed that. So yeah, I thought it was a good concept. And I agree. I think it does still hold its own. Even with it says it's like 2019 or 2015, things happened. And so it's supposedly taking place in the past now. It still actually works. It looks like the future. If they somehow erased those number references, those date references, it would totally hold up as being sometime in the future. And because it did feel real. It felt plausible as the way the future might be. But I agreed. There's also some things that I would change. And the things that I would change, and we can talk about that a little bit more detail when we get into it, may be the Michael Bay stuff. It may be that I am just not the target audience for this particular director's style. So we can talk about that in a minute.
I think the date thing is interesting. A lot of movies will do that. They'll put, this thing happened on this date, and it's like, sometimes I don't think that's necessary. And you're unnecessarily dating your movie for no real reason. It's like, we don't, as the audience, we typically don't need the date. It's like, okay, we get it. It's sometime in the future. And then we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, if you're doing something like Back to the Future, you kind of want to know when something's happening. But if you're just doing something at some indefinite point in the future, I think having a date maybe is not always necessary.
That's a good lesson. So what might you change in this story?
I guess the first thing I would change is the same thing that we talked about with a number of movies from last year. It's just too long. It didn't need to be so long. Particularly, I would have reduced the length of a lot of the action sequences where they were just fleeing and running away. That is a very Michael Bay thing where it's like, let's do action over the top, and it's fun for a bit, but then it's not really adding to the story. And when your movie's already over 2 hours, I think look for places to cut and tighten it up and make it more about the story than the action. So that's an obvious thing that I would change. That's not so much about the story necessarily, it's maybe more about the directing. Although I don't know how much was written into the script, so I can't really say. And another thing I noticed is, I think it's because of the same reason. The latter half of the movie wasn't as engaging as the first half of the movie for me, because the first half was about this mystery and what's going on, and the science fiction aspects of it, and then it becomes an extended chase scene for so much of it. So I guess that's kind of the same comment. Another thing I noticed, which felt off to me, was in the sort of like the final act of the story. The two main characters became very savvy. It felt unrealistic that suddenly they knew how to fight so well. Well, I guess they kind of set that up earlier, but that they knew like how to, work their way through this world that they had not really been exposed to. Certainly with the Scarlett Johansson character, I think her name was Jordan, since she was from an earlier generation and wouldn't have had the same memory rebuilding process that the Lincoln character did, it didn't make sense that she would become so competent at the end. I would have liked to have seen them continue a little bit more, playing with her sort of being kind of childlike and ignorant like she was at the start. Show a little progression there, but not as much, because she was just like full-blown action hero and by the end of the story, and it just didn't feel right to me. So I would have toned down her advancement, at least, if not his also. And then another thing, at the very end, I would have liked to have seen a better resolution scene, sort of the classic thing we've seen from other movies of this type, where there's news reports about how the truth was revealed, and we see people paying consequences, and how there's this uproar against the elites. It seems like that's kind of like the message of the story, and then they just kind of didn't show us that. They didn't give us that cathartic feeling. I'm like, oh, people are going to pay the consequences here. They just kept it at consequences of the people at the company, and in particular the Sean Bean character. I would have liked to have seen the broader effects on the world, because I think that's really, we'll get to this in the message, I think that's really what the story was going for. Anyway, those are the main things. I'll hand it off to you. What would you improve?
Well, and this is where I'd be interested in hearing your opinion of whether you think this is just a director's style choice or whether this is a story issue. The thing that I think bothered me the most is that when Lincoln and Jordan escape from the facility, Sean Bean, or whatever his character's name is, Merrick, Dr. Merrick, brings in a specialist, like a Navy SEAL, French, specialist ops guy, to hunt them down and essentially kill them.
Yeah.
Or bring them back. And we can get to that piece in a minute. Because he doesn't want to utilize the resources of the Department of Defense to find them. Because he doesn't want them to know that he's breaking the law by having what are supposed to be packets of cells available for the donors are actually human beings that they then kill when the donor needs them. So this is supposed to be all hush-hush, secret. First of all, how do you even know you can trust this guy to not tell the Department of Defense that you have violated the ethics codes or eugenics codes, the eugenics law of 2015 or something that they quoted? The fact that he was just so open with, yeah, here we are, we're committing this crime that's probably going to get us, imprisoned for multiple lifetimes, and I'm just going to tell you, stranger, and trust that you're not going to say anything. And ask you to discreetly and in special ops sort of way bring these people in and then turn around and have chase scenes with helicopters in the middle of multi-million populated cities? I was just thrown off by this whole, we need this to be discreet, and boom, the whole world is seeing these chase scenes. And the cops know that somebody's faking being cops because they've got police on their chests, and then they're running away saying, the cops are coming, the cops are coming. It was just so unrealistic, I could barely pay attention. It feels like a story issue to me. And I get it, they wanted to have chase scenes, but I think if they had done it in a way that didn't seem to contradict the original reason this guy was hired, it would have made more sense to me. But I'm thinking, how could they not want to investigate now why these people are being chased? How can the news organizations not want to know what's going on and finally trace it back to Dr. Merrick and his Island of Dr. Moreau House of Horrors? It just made no sense to me.
Yeah, no, I think it's a bit of both. I think it's partially story and partially direction, probably because of, where Michael Bay is going to go with this story to make it big and explosive and all that. That's a good note. I think when he first talks to this, special ops mercenary guy, and he tells him the story, you're right. I'm like, wait, you're just trusting this guy who you just met? There's no reason he couldn't have had like an already existing relationship there with someone he already trusted.
That would have been good, because that makes a lot of sense. That's a great suggestion, because that would then add to the layers of his sort of nefariousness of how he really wants to hide this crime that he's committing. So he already has on staff the right people. That's a great, great point.
And then it would have made the transformation of that character more interesting as well.
Yes.
Over the course of the story, we see him doubting his friendship and doubting what they're doing, and then ultimately choosing to do the right thing. I think that would have helped at least that issue. The other thing is, you're right. It became ridiculous. It's like, okay, I get it. They just want to take these two out at some point. It's like kill them at whatever cost, and hopefully they just vanish in the wind, and the police and whoever else are investigating this are just left wondering like what just happened here, right? And yeah, it's a mess, but presumably no one would be the wiser. That said, there's no reason they couldn't have been more tactical and more precise.
Yes.
In their methods. That's what these people do. They're not, he didn't hire military. He hired like special ops. They go in and they get out, and you never knew they were there. You don't know what happened, right? I think that still could have worked. You still could have had some pretty explosive, tense scenes. Probably scenes that were more tense because they would be a little less ridiculous. I liked the action. I thought it was fun, but like I said, I think it was a bit much and overdone. And I think it would have worked fine doing it, a little bit more, restrained as well. So yeah, I think those are good notes. I think it's probably and some direction. Yeah, it's probably a mix.
And I also wanted to comment about what you said about the end, because I too found the end to be unsatisfying. It was all this huge helicopter shots, circling shots of all the freed agnets. That's what they called the human beings that they were growing for their skin and organs, etc. And all these freed agnets wandering around in the desert where there's nothing. Are they really
you're
free?
Free now.
But you're free now to starve. And, it was unsatisfying because, okay, yay, the happy music and, the circling helicopter shots. But where's the shots of them being taken care of? Of these people who Dr. Merrick said are essentially like children. They're essentially like 15-year-olds. Inexperienced, no knowledge of how to take care of themselves, but here they are wandering through the desert, happy, happy, happy. It just felt so strange. I would have loved to have seen something where the authorities are coming. Like you said, there's the consequences, there's the caretaking, there's the rising above the base human flaws that caused this situation in the first place. That's sort of, most people like dystopian stories because you can find the hope in the terrible time. And we didn't really get that, except in the
Right.
relationship between Lincoln and Jordan. The hope was there. But the release of these people, yeah, that was hopeful. But where was then the human element to take care of them, to fix the problem, to make things better? That's what I think was missing.
Yeah, that's a good note because we don't really know what the people in the society would actually think. We only get really the Steve Buscemi's character's sort of POV, and he knows what's going on. He was kind of indifferent about it until they escaped. So maybe society would be the same way. I mean, we assume that's not the case, but it's not shown to us that that's not the case.
Right.
In this world that they're living in.
Right.
So yeah, you're right. That would have been good to see. Another thing that bothered me was the character, the mercenary character. You know, he helps them at the end, obviously, in escape, and then he just kind of walks off, and it's like, so is that guy like free? He just destroyed half of a city. Like he's just out walking now on his own. There's no retribution for him, nothing. So yeah, I just think I agree with what you said, and I think they could have wrapped it up. This is one of those action movies where I mentioned before at the end of Jumanji, where I said sometimes action movies don't really give you that nice resolution where you see people back in the normal world and you see how things have changed. This is exactly the kind of movie I'm talking about. It's just like, all right, climax is over, people are walking out, done. That's not satisfying.
Yeah, I agree. So did you draw any themes from the island?
And this was a little tricky for me because I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this. The theme in, your standard, not standard, but a typical hero's journey type of a story is tied to the change and the growth of the main character. But we didn't really get that here. I mean, the main character doesn't so much grow as just learn what's going on and fight against it. So I feel like this was more that he was a representative example of the group. So what I chose was about that. Like the theme was about this, like one group versus another. And so what I came up with was trying to enslave and use people inevitably leads to revolt. I think it misses the sort of abuse of wealth, which is also in there. But anyway, I'm curious to see, do you agree with what I came up with? And what did you come up with?
I do agree with what you came up with. I think that's a really good one. I actually struggled to pull a theme from this as well. I'm going to say, though, I think when you were talking about how you looked at it from the main character's perspective and the hero's journey, I think this main character was one of your static characters, changing the world around them as opposed to changing themselves. I think that's really... Fair. And I'm not even sure he represented the group, because the other members of the group were all like, let's go to the island. So I think he was very unique in that he changed both the external world in uncovering the secret of the people who were hidden away, as well as the internal group by uncovering the lie of the island. So I think he sort of stands alone, I think. I would argue that he stands alone as that static character, and he changes everybody. Maybe. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's probably true. So looked at in that context, what do you think? Like, okay, here's the message of this story. Here's the theme here's the theme of change that this guy brings about. What is that?
I think that theme of change is the the consequences of unethical and irresponsible use of technology. Now, that's like a blah 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 theme, but it's about using technology in an ethical way. And if you don't, there are consequences. And it really ties well into your comment about if you abuse people, there will be a revolt. So you blend those two together. You abuse people, they will revolt. You misuse technology, there will be consequences. Your unethical use of technology will result in consequences. And if that unethical use of technology is abusing people, there will be a revolt.
Yeah, that's good. Mixed them together. I like that.
But it was really, I think it was really hard to pull a theme from it.
Yeah, I think it's harder sometimes when it's this sort of stalwart character that's not changing themselves. Then you have, because there it's usually like, oh, they changed this one viewpoint in their head, and succeeded, right? And that viewpoint change usually points directly to the theme. But here you don't have that. So then you have to look at like, okay, what was the change to society? Or what was the change to, whatever group that main character is affecting?
Yeah.
And that points to your theme. So I think you're right. I think it is kind of a mix of those. It's the using technology responsibly, obviously not enslaving people to use their organs is also part of it.
What do you take away from The Island as a writer?
I think for me, the takeaway is about the science fiction aspect of it. It's like you never want to do sci-fi. Well, I wouldn't say never. It's generally better, I think, to, when you come up with a science fiction idea, not make the story just about that idea, but remember that it's also about the people and their relationships and how they react to that sci-fi idea, whatever that thing is that you're working with. Basically, to remember the human element of science fiction. That's my writing takeaway.
Nice.
What is yours?
Well, I know that I started this kind of complaining about the action scenes and how the discontinuity with, this is supposed to be discreet and yet you're blowing up Los Angeles. But I also agree with you that it was kind of fun. So they didn't hit all of so some of the things didn't make sense. Okay. But that's okay. It was still a fun story. It was not a miserable watch. It was like, okay, this is kind of fun. Yeah, I'm going, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Oh, that doesn't make any sense. Oh, that doesn't make any sense. But there still was a lot of fun involved in it. And to me, the takeaway is, it's okay to have fun.
Yeah, I think that's a really good note for Michael Bay movies. I think you have to kind of go into them with that mindset.
Yeah.
And just, enjoy the story at sort of like a high level and just try to have fun with it.
Yeah. And I will say, I actually really like your takeaway a lot about remembering the human, because it's really easy in science fiction to get caught up in the technology and get caught up in the world that you're building and not grounding yourself in the human. So I think that's a really good takeaway as well. Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in the 2005 film, The Island. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in The Mummy as we celebrate 1 year of doing the Stories Told podcast together. Thanks a lot, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.